Hey there, everybody. Sage Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And in this week's post, I'm going to be talking about some of the different ways in which we can have an adverse reaction to herbs, right? I think one of the biggest fears that we all have as herbalists and as practitioners is that not only will our remedies potentially not work or heal the person that we're working with, but that they might actually do harm, right? That we might give someone a plant and it creates an issue for them in their body, or they have a really bad reaction to that herb. And what are some of the different ways that that can happen, or reasons that that can happen, and how can you best avoid that? I think this is a really important topic of discussion, because sometimes we can have a reaction to an herb that is really strong and really intense, and sometimes that can actually be an indication that it is the right remedy, and sometimes we got to work through that. But sometimes it's an indication that it's totally the wrong remedy and you need to find something else to help that person out. So how do you tell the difference? How do you differentiate the ways in which people sometimes have really strong reactions to medicinal plants? So I think this is a really, really important topic of discussion. I think this is something that as practitioners we need to be aware of, because there's one thing that I see a lot of times happen is that sometimes people will have a really strong reaction to an herb. Maybe there will be an aggravation of symptoms. Maybe there will be other symptoms that emerge because it's the incorrect remedy. And what we see sometimes is people kind of playing it off like, oh no, that's good, it's a healing crisis, or it's approving, or it's good, just keep working with it. And there's times where that's really not true. And so I think it's very important for us to understand like what constitutes a healing crisis, which is a good thing, even though they're challenging, and what constitutes, an indication that you've selected the wrong remedy and it is actually creating further imbalance within that person. So that's what I'm going to be sharing about with you here in this week's post. And I hope you enjoy it, and hopefully it clarifies for you how to understand this very important dynamic, especially for those of you that are practicing herbalists and are administering plants to clients. Really pay close attention to this one, because it will serve you very well on your plant path. So, question number 7 is coming from Galina. When there is a reaction to an herbal remedy, how can I differentiate between A, a Herx reaction, healing crisis, B, a proving, or C, the remedy being the wrong one for the tissue state or constitution? Excellent question, Galina. Okay. So there's a number of things here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to mention is that you have differentiate between a Herx reaction / healing crisis. So I just want to I want to split those apart, right? Because a Herx reaction or a Herxheimer reaction is very different from a healing crisis. And so when I see that little slash there, it almost makes me wonder if in your mind a Herx reaction and a healing crisis are the same, and they're very, very different. So, right. So number one, in regards to a Herx reaction, this is going to be something that occurs when, a Herx reaction basically is when you see a really big die-off of bacteria in the body, and then the immune system is like, whoa, what's going on? Fever, inflammation, wow, like attack, right? And the whole body just flares up in this huge immune reaction. That is typically going to be happening, if someone has really serious infections accompanied by like large die-off. So we really see that a lot with people with Lyme's disease can get Herx reactions. other, more systemic type infections and issues. So that is usually going to happen if you're taking like really strong antiseptic herbs or even really strong alternatives that might, for example, maybe dump a bunch of immunological and bacterial waste products out of the lymphatic system or something like that. And then the immunity's like, whoa, holy shit, like we gotta get to work, and then it leads to that immune response. So that's gonna be a little more rare, I would say, than some of these other ones that you're mentioning. Healing crisis, this is a term, used in homeopathy and other, I guess, alternative systems of medicine. And I think this is a really important term to define and clarify, because I think a lot of times it can kind of be used as a little bit of a cop-out, right? Like, oh, you're just having a healing crisis, it's okay. When really it's one of these other things, right? Like they're having a bad reaction to the herb, or it's not the right remedy, or whatever that might be. So a healing crisis is, one of the best ways of thinking about a healing crisis is kind of looking at the timeline. And so someone comes to you with an issue and you get them on a protocol, and some of those issues start to resolve. And what we see is an increase in someone's vital force, right? We see an increase in their vitality. Maybe they're sleeping better, they're digesting and absorbing better, stress levels lowered, they're just healthier, right? So someone's health level increases, problems decrease, health increases, all of a sudden there's more vitality, and the vital force is like, oh, great. Now that I'm not dealing with the headaches and bloating and joint pain, now I can dig in to do some deeper healing work, right? And let's dredge up some of those emotional problems, or oh, there's that one thing from back then that never really got resolved. Let's deal with that, right? To further heal. And then we see the healing crisis, right? Which all of a sudden, there can sometimes be a little bit of a backtracking that happens, right? Maybe other symptoms start to arise, deeper symptoms start to arise. Oftentimes there is a psychological and emotional component to it. Maybe someone starts getting really depressed, or they get really emotional, or they start feeling all these feelings that they haven't felt in a really long time. That is where we kind of start to see the healing crisis come in. The key thing is that there's an initial healing that happens, and there's an increase in vitality, and then the healing crisis happens, right? And I think understanding that timeline is really important. If we don't see that, it's quite likely that it's not a healing crisis. The third one here, approving. So approving will usually be, usually to prove an herb, which this is, again, another homeopathic kind of term, which is the premise that a remedy will create the symptom in a high dose that it treats in a low dose. Okay, so you give a remedy in, like insanely high quantities, and then it starts to create the same type of symptomatic picture that same remedy will treat in a lower dose. And that's really the premise of homeopathy, like treats like. Now, one of the things about homeopathic preparations of herbs is oftentimes the homeopathic preparation is doing very similar things than the general herbal preparation does, right? Obviously, the homeopathics, work a little bit differently, considering they're like micro, not subatomic, but non-material dosing, basically. But if you look at certain remedies and look at the indications for the homeopathic, and then you study the herb, it's like, oh, they're kind of used in a similar way. So I would say it's rare that you will give someone an herb in a large enough dose to really prove it. Unless you're giving like you're giving insanely high doses at insanely high frequency, or two, that person is really, really, really sensitive and they should just be taking lower doses. So if they come to you with a problem and you give them an herb and that problem gets worse, or well, let's see, no, that's not a very good example. Say it's just someone comes to you and you give them an herb, and all of a sudden they start developing the symptoms that herb actually is used for, then that would be potentially considered approving. The last one is, I would say, probably the more common one, which is the remedy being wrong for the tissue state or constitution. So, and when you say constitution, I want to clarify that that is the current assumed constitutional state or the constitution of the disease, aka the tissue state, right? So if someone comes to you with a dry cough and you give them some OSHA and the dry cough gets worse, it's quite likely in this situation that the energetics of the herb are incorrect for the energetics of the condition. So you need to change remedies. Usually the best way to tell if a remedy is the incorrect remedy for the tissue state of the organ system or just the constitution of the person you're treating, is you'll see aggravation, right? They had a hot condition and all of a sudden it feels more hot. They had a cold condition and it feels more cold. Somehow whatever you're trying to treat either is getting worse or it's not improving. So I think that's the simplest way of being able to tell. It depends on the person, the remedy, what you're treating to really be able to tell, right? Sometimes we don't really know. Sometimes you can see if it's an acute condition, usually you can tell pretty quickly whether it's going to aggravate or not. If it's maybe a deeper, more chronic condition, might take a little longer to be able to tell if it's creating aggravation. So it's really all about your follow-up and making sure that you're just asking really good questions and checking in regards to how that person is responding to the remedies that you're giving them. So yeah, really, really great question, Galena, or set of questions.